Sir, welcome to this session.
Your mic is mute, sir.
Sir, your mic is mute. Please unmute it.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Good morning and welcome to this session.
Yeah, thank you and good morning to everyone.
Sir, before you start the session, I would like to introduce you to the speakers briefly. I'm sorry, to the participants briefly. Presently, he is providing consultancy to many companies in the areas of management and technology. As he is also involved with academic institutes for delivering lectures in technical and career development areas. He is postgraduate in mechanical engineering with specialization in heat and mass transfer, and has been working in the area of engineering and technology, as I said earlier, for last 40 years. Initially, he has worked with research and development department and was responsible for development of absorption of various technologies. He is subsequently he worked in the area of equipment and system business for fertilizers, refineries, chemicals, and power plants, including coal gasification in various capacities, with responsibility for design and engineering, project planning and monitoring, estimation and proposal engineering, thermal design, stress analysis, and product development. He has wide experience in problem solving and failure analysis for various equipment in fertilizer, petrochemical refinery, and power plant. He has presented more than 20 papers in national and international seminars and conferences, and also journals. He has written articles. To his credit, he has got 5 patents in the area of heat transfer equipment. He has many professional memberships to his credit. Some of them are: he is member of Bureau of Indian Standards, Sectional Committee of Chemical Engineering, Plants and Related Equipment. He is also member of Indian Institute of Chemical Engineers. He is member of Bureau of Indian Standards Subcommittee for Pressure Vessel Welding and Materials. He is also member of Technology and Energy Expert Committee of ICC. And he is further member of Indian Society of Heat and Mass Transfer. I must share with you something additional, that he has worked for 1 year in Mechanical Engineering Department at my institute, VJTI. There, he was respected, beloved, and considered to be a very popular teacher in a very short period of time by all the students. Personally, I have very high respect for Sri Sadekar sir, and I regard him as my professional guru for his thoughtfulness, work enthusiasm, and wisdom. So, with this brief introduction, Professor Sri Sadekar sir, can I request you to take over the session?
Yes, thank you. Before that, let me open my presentation. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, are you able to see?
Yes.
Yes, sir, we are able to see.
Okay. Now, good morning, and Professor Naik, thank you very much for the very exaggerated introduction, but thank you for that. And actually, thank you to you and the VJTI and AICTE for giving me this opportunity to share with all the people maybe my experience, and actually to get participated in this particular program, which is based on a theme of damage tolerance. So what will actually, when Professor Naik talked to me around this particular course for the faculty development program, I readily agreed. And that time only I was telling him that I will not talk on the fracture mechanics or the damage tolerance methodologies, Basically, I'll talk on a failure analysis. So he agreed upon. So that what I did, my topic's name is a failure analysis, a precursor to damage tolerance. So what we'll do is actually in this particular presentation, in the beginning, let us set the context for what exactly we are going to do now in this lecture. And damage tolerance being the theme of this particular presentation, I thought let us deal with how the failure analysis is getting connected to the damage tolerance methodologies. So that's very important to understand, because you are going to do for next 5 days, and you are already done in the first lecture on a fracture mechanics. So, and during the next 5 days, you are going to do a lot of things on a fracture mechanics detail. So how that actually gets correlated to the design as well as to and how the failure analysis plays the role in this type of thing. That's what we are going to do, the context setting. So before that, I want a small request to all of you. If you have questions, please note down, so that because this is an online session, so maybe I'll be able to take the questions at the end of the thing, but in between it will be a little difficult. That's what I've been told. So we'll do the question answer session during the, maybe I'll be taking around 1.5 hours or so. Okay. After that, we have question answer session. And one more request to Professor Naik. Anybody, if you feel that I'm a little fast or I'm a little slow, please let me know, so I can change my speed a little bit here and there. Okay, thank you.
Sure, sir.
Now,
Thank you.
Yeah, let us start now. So contact see, for example, already you have done a fracture mechanics lecture, but still I thought it may be appropriate to put a failure analysis and damage tolerance. What exactly is the failure analysis and what is the damage tolerance? So let us look at the failure analysis. An investigation to determine the cause of failure, usually with the aim of taking corrective action to fix the problem and mitigate against further failures. So anytime failure occurs, first thing happens is what is the really cause of the failure? And we require that to be quickly done. It is really not a root cause analysis. You like to know the major cause which has caused what failure has taken place and why failure has taken place. And that is very important, because you like to take the corrective action immediately. Because suppose if the equipment in the plant has failed, you want to start the plant immediately. So that is what the purpose of the failure analysis is all about. And if you really look at the industry, failure analysis is undertaken across all branches of manufacturing industry to prevent future product failures. But when you want to really a future product failure you want to avoid, you require to do a little bit root cause analysis, because that root cause analysis will tell you what improvement you require to do in your product. So that is the advantages you get there. Now let us look at the damage tolerance. What does the damage tolerance really means? A property of a structure relating to its ability to sustain defects safely until repair can be effected. Now it's very important to know here, these defects what we are talking about, they may be already there in the product, or it is getting developed over a period of time. Both are possible, right? The flaws can exist, or those flaws can get developed and many times some flaws remains there. They will not cause any problem because the structure has the ability to sustain, whereas some flaws, they will grow. How, at what rate they grows, that understanding comes to the damage tolerance or fracture mechanics methodology. So that's what it is said there. The approach to engineering design to account for damage tolerance is based on the assumption that flaws can exist in any structure, and such a flaws propagate with the usage. Now, when they propagate, whether they are dangerous, whether they are not dangerous, that we require to know. And these are the things which have got developed actually, which will help you to determine the remaining life or the residual life of the equipment. It's very important, right? So let us go a little further. So what I said here is failure analysis is carried out after the failure. See, failure analysis we are not going to do if the failure has not occurred. So failure analysis is done after the failure has occurred. Whereas damage tolerance needs the data on presence of defects and evaluates defects growth under certain loading conditions. Now there are two things can happen here. If there are existing, suppose for example, you have manufactured the equipment and you have done the non-destructive testing on it, and you observe that there is a small defect available. Now question comes whether these defects should be permitted or not permissible. if the defects, how you will decide that? So at that time, you may carry out the damage tolerance analysis or the fracture mechanic analysis and say, yeah, this thing I can tolerate. Or during the operation of the equipment, there can be a situation will come where actually you will have small cracks maybe developed because of certain loading or some phenomena occurred or some shock occurred or something occurred. Then you want to know whether this will withstand. So in that case also, damage tolerance methods will come into the view. Now, what really happens? The defects could be developed in service, or it could be present during the manufacturing, just like what I said just now. Damage tolerance methodology predicts the defect growth rate and ability to sustain, what we talked some time back. In a certain cases, for example, stress corrosion or fatigue cracking, the methodology could be used to avoid development of defect by predicting threshold loading condition. This is a very important thing. Actually, this has come to very handy for me. For example, because of the stress corrosion, some cracks can develop, stress corrosion cracking can occur, or fatigue cracking can occur. In the beginning, you will not know. There may not be defect available, and defect will get developed over a period of time. But that depends upon many things. Like, for example, if you take a stress corrosion cracking, it's a function of the stress, it's a function of the medium, it's a function of the temperature, and so many other parameters. But suppose you are able to develop the threshold, saying that environmental condition or the stress levels about this type of things may not really grow the cracks further. It's possible to do it, and people have done that type of thing. So actually, damage tolerance methods can be used for that purpose. We are going to see one of the examples of this type. In a corrosion, for example, somebody can say, okay, you maintain your chloride contents or something of this level, and then you will not have the cracks developing because stress corrosion cracking will not occur. But somebody will say, oh, that has been developed based on corrosion studies. May not be. It's a combination of damage tolerance and the corrosion studies, because stress is the parameter which was causing that stress corrosion cracking or the fatigue cracking. So important thing is to understand that this damage tolerance methodology has a role to play in everything. Now, one more thing actually I wanted to mention in the beginning, but I can mention now. I am being work with the Larsen & Toubro in heavy industries and all the equipment for fertilizer, petrochemical, power plant and all those. So my discussion today, many times I'll refer to the pressure equipment, okay? Because I'll not refer to some civil structures or those type of things, but my experience in that is not there. But methodology remains the same, so there's nothing to worry about that. But the examples which I'll give it to you will be mostly from the pressure equipment industry. Now, another example I want to give you. This example really is a very interesting. Joint efficiencies. For example, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the design of the pressure vessel using the ASME codes. In ASME code, there are formulas are given to calculate the thickness of the equipment, which is nothing but the thickness of the weld also. But there is something specified. They say the weld joint efficiency, if it is equal to 1, if you are going to do the 100% radiography of that weld after the manufacturing, then you can take the joint efficiency as 1. Now imagine what happens when you do the 100% radiography also. ASME doesn't say that 0 defect. There is a small cracks are actually very, there is a limit given. 100% how we can accept the radiographs. So that permits something. This means there are some damages, defects are available in the joint, right? Then it says joint efficiency, if it is a spot radiography, this means you are going to only do spot 10% of the weld you are going to check for the radiography. In that case, you have to take the joint efficiency of 0.85. And if you are not going to do any radiography, then joint efficiency 0.7. Now, what really this number 1, 0.85, 0.7 indicates? This means you are going to use the higher thicknesses. Higher weld thickness will come, because if joint efficiency is 1, there will be a minimum, whereas joint efficiency is 0.7, your thickness will be more by 30%. So you are actually providing for the damage not to occur. So really see this. Somebody can say, oh, this has been put like this. No. And when you say this, you know that those defects which get developed, because you will be welding with a standard methodology, defects will be very, very minimal. And those defects can be tolerated depending upon type of the radiography. So I was just thinking loud and saying, even these type of norms, when somebody got developed, that time probably in the initial few years back, the damage tolerance fracture mechanics may not be getting developed there. But over a period of time, people have done those type of analysis and found that they are reasonably good, because these are the standards have been proven. And that's very interesting to know about this, you know. The next tip to really look at it is the failure analysis determine a cause of, and this could facilitate damage tolerance. Now, why we are going to talk today failure analysis? I find that we are doing any analysis. For example, fracture mechanics analysis, crack growth and things like that. But I must know what really happened. Why? What is the cause of this failure? So that my analysis will become more meaningful. Because calculating the crack growth is only just like using the formula has one meaning. But when I know why this crack is occurring, what type of assumptions I should do in loading, what type of things, for example, even a crack growth propagation, I require to understand the loading which is going to occur on the equipment, right? So failure analysis, which determine the cause, will help you to, that will facilitate your analysis. And that's the reason what I thought, because you are going to talk next 5 days failure analysis. So I said, well, let me talk a little bit about failure analysis. Okay. And now look at the purpose. The failure analysis as well as damage tolerance, really speaking, they have different approaches. In one case, you are a failure has occurred, you are doing the analysis. In the second thing, you are assuming some defects and then you are finding the growth rate and the what will happen to it. But both purpose is the same. What is that? You want to enhance reliability of the equipment and systems. So finally, at the end of the day, all design, all analysis of whatever types you do, purpose is only one. We want to enhance the reliability of the equipment and systems which are designing, or we are going to use it, right? So now we'll start with a little bit about having known this. Means damage tolerance has a preference, damage tolerance has a role to play, and the failure analysis also has a role to play. Together, we'll start the thing knowing what exactly reliability. So what we are going to discuss now in next 1 hour 15 minutes now, because I have probably taken 15 minutes already. Reliability concept and failure patterns, degradation and failure mechanisms, failure analysis methodology. I'll explain you some case studies. I'll be taking you interesting case studies which will be for different types. They will tell you something about failure analysis, something about damage tolerance methods, something about how to find how the people have got the threshold levels in the damage tolerance methods, and then we'll conclude the presentation with some concluding remarks. Okay. So let us start with the first one, reliability concept and failure patterns. I generally, when this particular presentation, when I do it in the presence of the people, I generally ask the question, what is exactly reliability? But today, because we are online, I will define myself and start the things. So reliability of the equipment and systems is nothing but intended operation without interruption or failure. This is a classic definition. Reliability of the equipment of the system is intended operation has come to stop. It may be altogether it has stopped or it interrupted something. My car stops on the somewhere. That's an interruption it has occurred. This means reliability is less, right? So in reliability theory, the failure is defined as the event when a required function is terminated. So this is a nice definition I like. In reliability theory, failure is defined as the event when a required function is terminated. Function has stopped. It may be temporary or it may be permanent. So let us look at the type of the failures. So there are two types of failures. Degradation failures, where the system or the component no longer functions properly. It can be repaired and it can be made to work again. Okay, that's what happens. And most of the thing, this is about degradation failure. But there can be a catastrophic failure. End of the system or the component's life, we cannot use it anymore. So both things are possible, but most of the time we face with the first one, the degradation failure. So what really degradation failure? To understand, let us understand how the failure pattern is there, right? So if any equipment or the system, if you look at this particular thing, failure pattern over a period of from its inception over an operation, how the things happen. This is called as a bathtub curve, which is nothing but the reverse of the life cycle curve of the equipment. So if you see in this bathtub curve, the one y-axis is the failure rate and time is a element on the x-axis. So initial period of the thing, it's the infant mortality. That the failure rate is very high. Suddenly failure equipment was started and something it has given a problem, right? So that's the infant mortality. Then useful life of the equipment. And then as the aging occurs, wear out. Actually, this is true for the even all of us human beings. Also, the similar curve is which is the equipment and system, is applicable to all of us also. Now, which are the reasons? Suppose, for example, infant mortality result of gross defects. We'll see what are those gross defects are. Then normal wear and tear or unexpected operating condition can cause some problem during the life of the equipment. My machine, for example, a TV gets one day little problem, small problem, or my washing machine gets small problem, something similar to that. And then result of aging, because now the equipment has completely worn out or some problems have occurred and it is aging, it has aged. So result of aging will be there, wear out, and that will cause the first look. Now let us look at, for us just now important is result of gross defects. I want to, why I'm going to the result of gross defects, and then why I'm not going to discuss much on the normal wear and tear and result of aging. Okay. If you look at the gross defects, first one is the selection of inappropriate material. Because if you are not chosen the material properly for the service which is required, it can cause failure fast. So inadequate design, your design is not proper. There is something mistakes occurred, or because of the methods were not available, or some data was not available. So inadequate design or inadequate testing of the equipment. You have manufactured the equipment, you made the equipment, but you have not tested it properly. There are some unidentified defects remain inside. Maybe of any type. Some defects are there, and that they cause the problems afterwards. Or startup operation. In that, these all four conditions, your startup operation is not there. For example, in a process plant, for example, you are started the equipment and your rate of heating or rate of pressurization is very fast, and it is not able to take up those type of loads. In that case, some problem can occur. So these, if you really look at these four factors, they are applicable to any equipment, system. You take a machine, anything you take. It's, because though I am talking about pressure equipment, but actually you take anything. You are machines. You got it. You are not chosen the materials properly, or your adequate testing is not done. Some already cracks were existing in some places, and then they can immediately infant mortality can occur. Startup operation, you are not done properly. Suddenly you give a jerk of something like that. So these four reasons are applicable to any analysis you are doing. This particular thing is applicable. So required to be checked. The other one, normal wear, tear, etc., depends upon a type of the equipment. They are specific to the type of the equipment or the system or the product which is you are having. So they will not be common like that. They will differ for different equipment. Result of aging is a known factor. So okay. Now let us look at, based on this gross defect, if really I want to say equipment and reliability depends upon four basic factors: basic configuration and design, how you have carried out the design and basic configuration of the equipment, how well you have done the manufacturing. When I say manufacturing, it also includes the testing part of it, quality assurance part of it, what type of testing you have done, quality assurance, how it was done and all that. Then operation, how well you are operating, how many times your abnormal operating conditions are coming into picture, all those like operation methods, startups, shutdowns. Maintenance, how well you maintain the equipment. If the problem comes, you continue with that, or if the problem comes, you immediately take the corrective action on it. So all these four factors, actually reliability depends of the equipment, depends upon these four factors. So let us go into the little detail more about it. Basic configuration and design. Dr. Naik, I'm a little fast or slow?
No, it's fine. It's going on fine.
Okay, fine. Okay. Now, basic configuration and design. If you really see in the basic configuration, which are the factors coming there? Selection of materials, with normal and abnormal operating design conditions. I want to tell you something. This is very, very important. Most of the people, when we start designing something, we define only one condition. That these are design conditions. But really speaking, we must know what type of abnormal or the special design condition can occur during the operation of this equipment, specifically in a process plants, even in otherwise. Many times, for example, suppose if abnormal conditions are not known, you will design only for one condition, and then there can be a disaster. So, I want to tell you, during my 37 years of experience in L&T, at least few occasions I have found people don't give you the abnormal operating conditions, and then you really land in a problem. So actually many times it's good to talk to the people who operate the plant or operate the system, and then tell them what type of problems, what type of operating condition change during the lifetime of this cycle of the equipment. And if you know those abnormal conditions, one can take care at the initial design stage itself. So many times I just want to tell you, many of the process licensors, if you see either process licensor or the people who prepare the specification for equipment, they don't only specify the design condition, they also specify other conditions based on the experience of it. And that is the reason specification, many of the industry, if you see the specification of the equipment 20 years back and today may not be the same, because some experience has come and those experiences gets incorporated into the specification. Sometimes people feel, oh, they are becoming more stringent, but they are not becoming stringent, because some experience has come and that experience is getting incorporated into the specification. That's what it is. Okay. Next is the design methodologies. For example, today we are talking about damage tolerance, fracture mechanics. Today, if you could talk everywhere, finite element analysis. Many times previously, this type of analysis were not possible. Suppose if you take a 25, 30 years back, there was something, but not to the extent at which today available. Those are all methods which are available. So many times those design methodologies which are not available, many times you are doing the approximations or using the only codes. So very complicated shapes, etc., may not be possible to take care of. And those type of design methodologies which have improved, if the proper design methods are not utilized, that can result into the problem. Let us come to the manufacturing. So manufacturing, for example, manufacturing processes, forming, welding, heat treatment. Now, forming, for example, specifically when you do the forming, because elongation will occur, those type of permittable elongations, whether because of that any changes will occur in the structure of the equipment, structure of the material, that is very important to know. So whether are you giving a note of that, whether you want to do the hot forming, cold forming, if in a cold forming, whether cold working will occur on the equipment and thereby material will get damaged. All that is required to be seen. Welding, how you are doing the welding, any defects of the welding, while doing the welding, whether those methods, welding electrodes, whatever you are using, whether they are appropriate. Heat treatment, for example, many times what happens, stresses get developed during the welding, whether you are doing the stress relieving of that, and how well you are doing the stress relieving. So suppose some equipment are very thick, because I can tell you, we used to manufacture around 300 millimeter, 320 millimeter thick. In those type of equipment, if you don't do the proper stress relieving, you will have the residual stresses remaining in the weld, and there can be small defects which will come, and then those defects will grow. So it's all this type of becomes a combination. While doing the heat treatment itself, whether any cracks will get developed in the because of the constraints. Suppose how the equipment is supported during the heat treatment, whether it will cause some constraints, and as a result of that, cracks will get developed. And if those cracks are small cracks which get unnoticed during the testing, then whether it will create a problem. Then quality control, process techniques, whatever quality control you are doing, testing how you are doing, whether your techniques of the today, for example, lot of techniques are available for radiography, develop different types. You can record the radiography, you can record the ultrasonic testing, you can record, those techniques are available. And I can tell you one of the examples, sometime few years back, we were doing the stainless steel welding of a 90 millimeter thick stainless steel. And to find the defects in the stainless steel of 90 millimeter, we required to bring a special probes in order to find the defects. And it was, I can tell you, because of those different methods, we could locate some defects and we could take the corrective action. So this type of thing happens. Otherwise, again, then damage tolerance method, but many times if the defects are little bigger, then they may grow, and that's what you can't take chances with that. Then final testing of it, how you do it at your equipment, okay? And then operation and maintenance, already I talked about, is like change of service conditions, upset conditions, that's what abnormal operating conditions, operation and maintenance of the. Now, most important thing is speed of the operation people and maintenance people, because I can tell you many times in many operating plants, if you go and ask them the parameters, somebody will tell you the parameters, but many times the parameters are matching to the design. Never it can happen in the anything where you will get exact parameters of a design in an operation. It's not possible. People note down those, but today it is not possible, because today all things is a computerized. Sorry. Today, all processes are computerized. There's a automatic processor, data gets recorded, so there's nothing to worry about it. Then process control and monitoring, how well you are controlling your processes. So reliability, if you really look at these factors, they are critical factors which determine the reliability of the equipment, right? So let us look at the now, having seen that, now let us what degradation or the failure mechanisms can occur. Now here I want to tell you, because my experience, as I mentioned earlier, my experience being on a pressure equipment, because I work for the refinery, fertilizer and petrochemical and the power plant and all that. Mostly I was dealing with the pressure equipment. So most of the talk will be around that. But everything is applicable to the most of the other general equipment and systems. The little with the nitty-gritty may change, but the principles will not change. Okay. Now, general types of degradation mechanism that can cause failure of the pressure equipment, for example, any pressure vessel. So, mechanical cracking and damage. This mechanical cracking and damage can cause because of many things. You are not designed it properly. It is not able to sustain the pressure. Thing can occur. Or, for example, as some defects which will remain as we talk about that, those type of things can grow and then can cause the problem, right? General and localized corrosion and erosion. Yes, for example, corrosion can occur at general. For example, if you are not selected the material properly, so there can be a corrosion because of some other environmental thing are coming in contact with that. So thing like that. For example, if you take the velocity piping, you have kept a very high velocities inside the piping, and there is something particles are inside. Erosion can cause. In a heat exchanger, similar things can occur. So depends upon a surface. For example, you are not provided any protective covering for some of the equipment inside internals, then it can cause the erosion. So one has to look into various. These are the general degradation mechanisms. Environmentally caused cracking, like chloride stress corrosion cracking, or the caustic corrosion cracking, or nitriding, for example. I'm going to give you the example of the one example of the chloride stress corrosion cracking, and one example I'll give you of the nitriding also. Then metallurgical aging and degradation. So over a period of time, there will be a metallurgical aging of the, so grain structures will change and the degradation will occur. That's the reason. And that also is actually, this particular degradation can get modified. Suppose there's a hydrogen present inside. So what will happen? Hydrogen will get into the material, and thereby degradation will occur, because the hydrogen embettlement can occur, grain structure can change, and all that type of thing. So the metallurgical aging and degradation is also a function of the service what is happening, right? Then high temperature degradation and brittle fractures, creep phenomena can occur. I'm going to give you an example of this brittle fracture of the creep phenomena. Then operation wear and tear. You know, operation wear and tear depends upon your operation, things can occur. So these are the generic degradation mechanisms which will occur in the equipment. Okay. And then I just listed here, I'm not going to go through this slide at all, but just to show you various degradation mechanisms which can occur. Start from the graphitization and ending with the carbonate cracking and all that type of thing. So I'm not going to explain any one of this, but this is just to give you a slide which makes you little think, looking at so many phenomena will be there to look at. Okay. Then now this is very important. If you really look at some type of service which requires special attention, because by now, as I mentioned earlier, based on the experience, many specifications tells you saying that the service is of this type, you require to take care in this type. Even people specify, if my service is of this type, what hardness I should maintain while welding on my weld, because based on the experience, those norms have been developed. So specifically attention. Most of the things, if you look at the, I'll give some references where you can look this and get this information. For example, lethal service, fatigues, if it's a cyclic loading, you should really pay the attention to that. Brittle, low temperature service, high temperature, high shock or vibration, are service environments where hydrogen is present or ammonia is present, compressed air, caustic solutions are available, or chlorides are there. All these type of things are, when environment is there, one should look into specially while designing selection of the material, and specifically selection of the material and the provision in the design. That is very, very important to do. So this is just give you a little brief about that. And I mentioned here, I think when you will get this presentation, this recording of this particular thing, you'll be able to see the, you will have these references. API RP571, damage mechanisms affecting fixed equipment in the refinery industry, is written for the non-material materials, corrosion specialists. Okay, but that's a comment. But the refinery industry, so it is actually very, very nice standard. And somebody can say, oh, standard, how it will give? But I'll tell you the theory explained in this particular API standard is a very, very interesting. If you get opportunity, please look at it. For other industries, there's a WRC 488, which gives the damage mechanisms, peak equipment in the fossil electric power industry. And there is another one, which is WRC damage mechanism affecting peak equipment, pulp and paper industry. So all these standards give you a lot of information, but first one and the last one is something related to the damage tolerance, okay? Specifically fitness for service. This includes the fracture toughness and crack growth estimation. And this standard, just I want to tell you, this is an ASME adopted standard also, API 579, which talks about residual life assessment or the remaining life assessment. And this is a very nice standard. All of you can have a look at it if you get some time. Okay, thank you. Now we'll go a little further now. Having seen that, we are going to now discuss the failure analysis methodology. Okay. So, failure analysis methodology, why you are doing the failure analysis? We have already talked about it, but still to repeat again. The basic objective is to find out the preliminary cause of the failure, and after taking corrective action, suitable measures to be taken to avoid recurrence in future based on the root cause analysis. Now, that's what I mentioned here, the root cause analysis. When you do the failure analysis, you get immediate why it has failed. That cause why it has failed. But why that cause has occurred, that will not know in a failure analysis, right? So for that, you require to do the root cause analysis. So there's a difference between the failure analysis and the root cause analysis. Failure analysis, failure has occurred, I'm finding the cause, how that failure has occurred. Why that cause has occurred, that requires a separate study. And many a times, immediately you do the failure analysis, and afterwards, once you take a corrective action at that moment, then you start doing the root cause analysis in order to have future problems to avoid. But root cause analysis is a very, very in-depth study. I'm not going to cover that part here. We will be talking only on the failure cause analysis, which is done immediately on the failure. Okay. So most of the steps given here, again, they are for pressure equipment related or even a machinery. For example, some of the machines fail. You can use this particular thing. But methodology, though it's a specific little sometimes, but I can tell you it's very generic also. And you can utilize for any analysis of when you are doing the failure analysis of any equipment. Okay. So if you really look at this, this is a very interesting slide. It tells you the steps involved in the failure analysis. First important thing, what happens, I'll tell you, many places, history and data collection. And this is the real problem many places. As soon as, if you go to any plant, when the failure occurs, first thing people do is to immediately start correcting it, because you can't keep the plant without operate. You have to operate it immediately, because otherwise you have production loss. So very, very fast manner, people somehow do some correction and start working. In that process, we really miss the data collection. So history data collection is very, very important thing. Then sample collection. Each one of this we are going to discuss in detail little bit steps of this. So history of data collection, sample collection. Then preliminary examination, that is a visual examination, visual test. And for me, I want to tell you, which you will come to that, I'll talk about it more, but just to tell you, visual test, there's no replacement. Any other test you talk about, but most important is the visual test of the failure. If some of the experts look at the visual test, and they will tell you the why the failure has occurred and what type of failure has occurred, why it has occurred, without doing any of the testing. So powerful is the visual test. Then NDT, non-destructive testing of different types, mechanical testing, then macroscopic examinations, microscopic examination, determination of failure mechanism, chemical analysis. Chemical analysis, why it is important, we'll come to that. Then special test, if you want to simulate the thing failure, sometimes you may not get the clue, so you like to simulate, we will talk about that. And finally, all these studies, putting it together, the conclusion and reporting. So these are the steps involved in the failure analysis. Why I put in one, though we are going to talk on each one of them, I thought of making this consolidated slide, because at least this is a generic for any analysis you are doing. You should have this. You may say, I will not do this, I will not do this. You can put a cross on some of this particular thing depending upon a type of the equipment and things like that. But these are the things involved in the failure analysis. Okay, so let us go to the first one. So you will find on each one of the slide I have put to-do items and what are the goal of doing this particular thing. Why we are doing this particular test and what is to be done. It says here all the files and records related to the failed part be made available on the working table. It has been written such a way that most of the things I can tell you, my experience of so many years, and I was involved in many failure analysis. Okay, fortunately for me, because failure analysis teach you really I can say what you can learn from the failure analysis, you can't learn generally from anywhere. Because when you start looking at the failures, then you think over it and do a lot of testing, then you get an insight into it, every factor associated with it. You know, like what we talk about design, manufacturing, operation, maintenance. But if you don't know all these 4 factors, you cannot do the failure analysis. So failure analysis teach you that. But for that purpose, you must have the data record, collecting all those records in the beginning. Don't even analyze. Many times people start, as soon as they get into this historic data collection, they start analyzing. I don't do that. I just say that I'll collect the data, I'll do the analysis later. Because when I start collecting that time, there's a possibility that I'll miss collecting some data. So when you are collecting data, yeah, have a look at it to see that completion of the data, but don't try to analyze it. Never. Because if you start analyzing parallelly, you lose the things. You only see whether whatever data required, whether am I getting it, not getting. Soft copies of scanned reports, emails. Many times what happens, there's a lot of correspondence. Everything will not be there in the design record books, but there will be something written here and there. So whatever related data, you try to collect it. Correspondence with the vendors, manufacturers. See, for example, you have purchased some equipment. Some reports have come, but you may not have looked at that report at that time. But when a failure has occurred, you require to really go through the detail. So all the correspondence of manufacturers, vendors, testing report, manufacturers, the history of that equipment, all you require to collect it. And photographs and whatever previous inspection. Suppose that equipment has, before failure, some inspection has occurred. What was the observed in those inspections? All those records you collect. What is the goal of this particular doing is assimilation of the following. Why I am doing that? I'll get the specification sheet of the part and component, so I know exactly how this equipment was designed. I'll get the specification. I'll get design and manufacturing data through those records. So if there are any defects, I'll come to know. That's a goal. Because during the manufacturing, in a design, what methodology was used and whether it was appropriate or not, I'll come to know. What type of safety factors were taken during the design, I'll come to know if I collect the data related to that. In service inspection records, whether previously there was small defects were there which were ignored and the equipment continued to run, so you will get in-service inspection records will tell you all that information. So everything you collect here has a purpose. Okay, past failure history, analysis report. Suppose somebody has a past failure history and analysis report available, that will tell you what was there, what was found out, and what has happened today. So failure mode observed if available. Sometimes these type of things are not but I can tell you my experiences. If I have to go 15 years back and today, there's a lot of difference. You will get now most of the process industries are the fertilizer, petrochemical, power. You take any industry of this type, people will do the analysis and the data is available. They may not do some few things because of some constraints. They may not have everything, but some data is not available or analysis is not done. That will not happen. Whether that analysis is perfect or not, that's a different story. But you will have some data. So look at those type of things, you know. Then latest modification made. These are another important thing. Sometimes what happens, plant has been installed, designed, but depending upon suddenly somebody says, oh, if you modify this, no, we'll get some more. Sorry, you might have got disturbed little. Is it okay? Are you able to hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, so because there's a call, so we got a little disturbed. Okay. Now, yeah. So latest modification made, very important, because what happens, suddenly somebody gets idea saying that, oh, if I do this change now, we'll get better productivity or better yield of the product and improve, capacity improve ho jayega. So people do that change, but then they don't understand when you do those type of changes, will have some effect on other equipment, right? So that's why it's better to collect the data related to the modifications made and what photographic records and all that. So each has a purpose. So first we collected the information and we had a purpose for it, right? Now let us go to the now next one, sample collection. Now this to reach the, suppose for example, equipment is at site somewhere, and so first thing is reach the site at earliest. It's very important. I can tell you many times I used to travel. If you come to know equipment has failed, and if somebody tells you some equipment has failed, and you should say when it has failed today. So I'll say I'll come tomorrow morning, or maybe sometimes I have to travel in the night, because as early as you go to the site, you will get the correct inputs. Because many times what happens in a hurry, people play. It's not with a, people don't do with a purpose, but in a hurry, people will make some things and changes there. Something will start cleaning and things like that. Actually, if the failure has occurred, nothing should be cleaned before somebody observes it. I'm very clear. I used to get some samples from the site, So when the samples used to come to our place, people will say, "Oh, samples have come, so we'll clean it." I said, "Nothing doing. Nobody will touch it, because uncleaned samples important to observe it." Okay, that's the samples part of it. So samples going to the site immediately, looking at the failed parts and pieces, survey the whole area along with the operating staff. People who have operated the plant. I'm going to tell you the story about this maybe when I'm discussing the case study. Important to talk to the operating people. The discussion with the operating staff and listen carefully to the eyewitnesses, if any, because all they will give you. Discussing is to the eyewitnesses also the sample collection, because they tell you the what actually occurred. Those are the samples of a failure, because failure while failure occurred, you are not seen, but through their talks you may come to know what really happened during that particular incident. So that's nothing but a sample collection. What is the goal? Very clear. Failed part pieces to be collected, photographs shall be taken immediately, look for other evidences, operating conditions, okay, interview the eyewitnesses, then compile and compilation of the notes. When you go to the site, or when you look at the site or wherever failure has occurred, when you collect all this information, immediately making the notes of it. Because many times what happens, okay, I'll write the notes in the evening. That's what many of us do. But I'll tell you, I used to immediately, however time it takes, immediate notes making. May not be very elaborate manner, but every point which is important to the failure analysis should be noted. You may not analyze, but noting down those points, and so that you can have a look at it little later. Okay. Next one is the preliminary examination. I told about preliminary examination, that's the visual examination. Without cleaning, specifically I written there, so visual examination without cleaning. Photographs of the fractured, failed part, because all fracture mechanics people who are experts, they will tell you the type of the fracture, how the surface looks like, will tell you why the fracture has occurred. I have seen the people looking at the fracture surface, they will say, this is what has happened. So visual inspection of that, because any disturbance of that thing will not tell you the truth. So without any cleaning or anything like that, you should look at it. Even people say, okay, this part probably was cracked, was failed 2 months back, because looking at the color, they will tell you, no, this failure has occurred yesterday. The immediate thing, because surface may be shining or it may have some different type of the texture and all that, So people are very expert. So this, you should look at this all and the group discussion with the inspectors. And then what is the goal? Again, the same goal, general assessment of the basic design and workmanship. So you will also come to know from this particular thing, preliminary examination, whether workmanship, for example, weld. When you look at it, you will come to know whether weldment, was there any this particular thing caused because of the faulty workmanship, or it is something has occurred in the process, or because of something else phenomena has occurred. All that will come to know from the visual thing. Then logging the data of approval surface defects, something like that. So see, specifically surface defects noting down is very important. And if the part fortunately somebody has disturbed, then it's a different story. But if it is not disturbed, so we can even look at it whether the cracks have developed from, suppose it's the vessel failed. Cracks have developed from inside to outside or outside to inside. Depending upon the crack opening, you will come to know whether crack has grown from inside to outside or outside to inside. All that you will come to know. So it's very important to understand all those things during the preliminary examination. The original shape just after fracture, that's what I said. Save the photographs of the thing, this is okay. So you will find the goals are more or less common in every examination. In some of the examinations they will vary, but in these first 3-4 examinations, preliminary examination, sample collection, history, they are more or less same. Basically collecting the information as much as possible. Okay. Now let us go to the next one, non-destructive testing. Now, applicable MDT to be performed. For example, sorry, non-destructive testing to do attempts for applicable MDT to be performed. For example, it is not necessary to carry out the non-destructive testing all the time. Depends. Some parts may be visible if sample can be taken, because sample you may not be able to take a sample every time, because otherwise equipment is there. With you are going to use it after some repairing and things like that. Then how can you take a sample out from that equipment? It's not possible. So in that case, you will do the non-destructive testing around the crack or around that failure area to find out what type of things have occurred. So maybe first is a dye-penetrated testing, magnetic particle testing, ultrasonic, radiography, eddy current test inspection. So these are various testing you will do it depending upon what is required for that purpose. If a surface cracks I want to find out, I'll do the dye-penetrated testing, which will tell me on the surface what has happened, or inside little how deep they are gone. Magnetic particle testing will tell you how deep, again on the surface related thing. Ultrasonic testing will tell you inside the material. Radiography will tell you. Eddy current testing, specifically for example tubes etc., which are very thin tubes. People do the eddy current testing inside the heat exchanger, for example. So depending upon a type of the thing, you use the type of the testing. Whole goal is what? To find out the crack, flaws, discontinuities, metal thickness loss. I want to find out the metal thickness loss, how much it has occurred, that type of thing you can do. And compilation of all these records finally for the purpose of analysis. Let us go to the next one, mechanical testing. Consider mechanical attributes of the failed part. Why that material was selected? These are very important. Principal mechanical properties of the failed part. Selection of the mechanical testing to be carried out, hardness, tensile, impact, and fatigue. Look at this. But that, as I said, sometimes you may not be able to take the part out. If you are able to take the part out, actually you can do all things, tensile, impact of that failed part itself, to find out what type of property degradation has occurred. Sometimes possible, sometimes not possible. But at least hardness can be measured at any time. Because equipment, even in a working condition, I can measure the hardness. It's possible to do it. But original properties, to know that what type of original property that material had, are test reports. Suppose example, I study the test reports. Okay, principal mechanical report, what type of properties they were there. Now here because for the time, I will not get into detail, but see, for example, many times what happens, you have purchased the material with some properties. But afterwards, you have done the, let's say, forming, then a hot heat treatment, and maybe suppose you have made a particles in a hot rolling of the cell. You are manufacturing the cell of the vessel by hot rolling, and then you have done the normalizing or something like that. And after that, you have done the heat welding and then heat treatment. What type of heat treatment cycle you are used? All that will change the property, original properties. So have you carried out the simulated heat treatment, and those properties are available of the material? That's very important to see. Many times what happens, it's a very expensive process in the beginning, but I can tell you all the critical equipment which are manufactured, we carry out the material before even material purchase. During the purchasing of the material, the supplier of the material is supposed to give me simulated properties of the material for different conditions. I'll tell him, I am going to do the 10 hours of stress relieving. So you put the sample of the material, first heat it for stress relieving temperature for 10 hours and then carry out the property test and tell me what properties material you will have. So it's very important to do all that. And those records, if you start studying, that will give you the data. And field quarters there, definitely it will help you. Okay. Now let us go to the macroscopic examination. Surface examination at magnification image ranges from 1 to 100. Examination with the unaided eye or on a hard lens. Low power optical microscope may be used. So these are just some of the instructions for the macroscopic exam. You want to see the surface defects. Determine the direction of the crack growth, presence of the chevron marks. Chevron marks is nothing but the undulated type of thing. Determine the origin of the fracture, where the fracture has originated. That will be able to come to know from the macroscopic examination. Okay. Then microscopic examination. Transmission electron microscope to be used for the magnification up to 100 and scanning electron microscopes, SEM, it's called SEM, for magnification of 10,000x to 60,000x. So depending upon what type you are studying, use the appropriate equipment, microscopes, in order to study those microstructures, right? Determination of the dimpled fracture, cleavage facets, brittle and intergranular fracture, hydrogen embrittlement, fatigue failure. I want to tell you something. When I am going to show you the one example, covering most of this examination, what I am talking about, I am going to show it to you. Okay. So one example will be shown. All this what we are talking here, I'm going to show the corresponding what happened in the actual. Okay. The photograph put here, they are not actual. They are just to give you a little feel of it, this part of it. So look at this goal. Cleavage, brittle intergranular fracture. So if you study that particular thing, you come to know how it has occurred. Hydrogen embrittlement, whether there's a hydrogen embrittlement has occurred of the material, or it's a fatigue failure. All will come to know looking at the microstructure. So that is very important to study. Next one is the metallographic examination. Selection of the metallographic sections, preparation of the metallographic sections, polishing and etching, and then determination whether the material has a required structure. Look at the following: inclusions, microstructural segregation, decarburization, whether sometimes sensitization has occurred, something has occurred, sensitization because of that stainless steel specifically, sensitized if it is there, the structure will change, carbon pickup, improper heat treatment, intergranular erosion. All this will come to know when you do the metallographic examination. Now, how to prepare the samples? This is a science in itself. We will not get into it. I am trying to give you all the keywords which are required. The slides will be with you anyway through the recording. So look at this type of thing. And failure analysis is a mixture of everything. Okay. So look at this, and the goal is to find out this part of it. Next, determination of the fracture type. Collection of the past information, translating all the information to detect the fracture. Goals is to whether it's a ductile fracture, the transgranular brittle fracture, intergranular brittle fracture, fatigue fracture, or is the stress corrosion cracking. Actually, I'm going to tell you the story on a stress corrosion cracking, how I found out in one particular place. Actually, I was not knowing even that time what is stress corrosion cracking, but I'll tell you the story of that at appropriate time. Liquid metal embrittlement, creep and stress rupture failure. So actually, what collection of the past information will tell you, and then you can determination of fracture type. Looking at the surfaces, looking at this particular thing, you will collect this information, okay, and do the analysis. Then chemical analysis. This is a very important part. Analysis of the bulk surface and analysis of deposits. Suppose there are some deposits. Actually, you can collect the sample of the deposit, analyze it, or if you are able to take the sample out of the material, you can take the sample and whether to find out. For example, many times in a heat exchanger, for example, we take the tube samples and say whether the by chance tube materials was defective, whether it was meeting the requirement of the thing or not. So, by mistake, suppose many times what happens, different tubes come from a different thing and you have mixed it by mistake. So whether the material is what is supposed to be used, whether it is used or not. So you can take the sample, carry out the chemical analysis. It will tell you whether it's meeting the requirements or not meeting the requirements. Okay, what type of alloying elements were there, supposed to be there, and whether they were sufficient there or not. You might not have really studied well in the beginning the test certificate, but when failure occurs, you require to study it in detail. It is important to study even in the beginning. For example, I will tell you, though I used to do the design and things like that for few years in L&T, I used to make sure that all material test certificates will come to me even before manufacturing. Though I was in a design head, I used to have a cursory glance at those, whether they are meeting all the requirements or not. And though our quality assurance department used to check, we used to do the double check of it, so that whatever requirements we have specified, whether they are met or not met. That's very important to see. And is there any deviation? That's what extent of any deviation and all that. And then next one, as I said some time back, suppose for example, it is not possible to take something from the equipment, then I can do the simulation of it. So I'll say, oh, I cannot take the sample. So I take the same material. I'll use some cycles or something like that, whatever loading conditions I'll do, and I'll do the simulation of it. So that recurrence of failure to be seen, whether this particular thing is caused because of this phenomena, that can be done by the simulation. Suppose fatigue failure, you may not be able to do for the long cycles, but some tests can be done, some accelerated tests can be done. So there are, for example, accelerated corrosion tests are available. One can say, if the corrosion failure, I can do that, take this material and see accelerated corrosion test I can carry out and see, oh, this type of corrosion can occur, and there are correlations available. So simulation can be done in order to study that. And at the end, most important part of it, that is conclusions and reporting. When you have collected so much data, making them systematically the data analysis. I want to tell you sometimes in a failure analysis, which I did many, but one particular failure analysis, I was so involved, I said every step will be done only in a series. Nothing will be in parallel. Reason being, when you start doing the parallel, you miss some steps. So every series, when we should do in a series, we'll do one particular testing and then we'll take a decision whether to do the testing further or what type of testing I'm going to do, whether what modification I should do. So every test completion, I used to study it completely and draw, saying that now I want required to study this for this. So let us do the next one. So it's a very important in a failure analysis, studying each one, drawing some references so that you can do what additional testing we require to carry out. But at each stage, completing the documentation as much as possible. So when you are doing the complete final report, most of the data is available, most of the analysis is available, and then one can do the complete report of it. So this is how things goes. We'll do now what we will do is after this. Actually, I hope I'm not too fast. Am I right, Professor Naik? Is okay? Looks to be okay.
Sir, about 1 hour is over. Your speed is looking fine.
No, so 4 case studies I'll manage in next half an hour. Okay.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah. So now what we are going to do, having seen that, we are going to see the case studies. Okay. So we are going to study the case studies. That's what now start. So I want to say something here. I have chosen 4 case studies. Okay. The first case study, which actually may not be related to the damage tolerance to that extent, but this case study giving the failure analysis complete methodology what we have discussed, every step of that methodology you will be able to see in this particular thing, okay, including from the preliminary examination, visual examination, macro, micro, you call it, everything has been done, and then we are drawing the conclusions of it. So this is the one example. Second example I am going to tell you about basically a creep failure. But because it has some damage tolerance phenomena occurred, it's a fatigue failure, and it's a very interesting case. So I have taken something which may be but where analysis was very important. We did a lot of analysis as well as theoretical analysis, FEM and all that type of thing was also important. So that's a mixture of the two. Okay. In this particular case, first case, there's no FEM and things. That second case, there's a FEM and all that. Third case is actually a equipment which was supplied, which some defects were observed in operation, and then it was very essential to do the crack growth studies. So that was carried out. So what has happened to that equipment, I'll tell you about crack growth and damage tolerance, how it was done. And the fourth one is how somebody has developed the threshold levels, which helps you to design the equipment. So you people can also think over a future of time somewhere, how can I do that type of thing, So that's the fourth case. So this is a combination of the 4 cases. So let us start with the case number 1. Now, if you look at this first case one, I don't want to tell the name of the equipment, but I can tell you the equipment where, okay, this is in a fertilizer plant. This equipment is in a fertilizer plant. This is called as ammonia converter. Okay. And this equipment, if you really look at it, is around 3 meter diameter. You can see here the dimensions are given. Wall thickness is 169 millimeter. But this equipment was manufactured in a typical fashion because it is having inside, there are a lot of internals because this equipment is filled up with a catalyst. And to store this catalyst, in order for the flow, there's a specific arrangement inside. Because the gas flows, synthesis gas, which is a mixture of hydrogen and nitrogen. Is written there, hydrogen. So hydrogen and nitrogen and a small amount of ammonia is also there. All that mixture flows inside. The hydrogen and nitrogen reacts with it and it gets converted into the ammonia. And there will be what goes out also is a mixture of ammonia, but ammonia percentage will be higher than what has happened at the inlet because it is a reaction has taken place. And then along that mixture flows to the further. Now this equipment actually is, as I said, thickness 169 is a very interesting thing. The cell material for this was in this particular case was 13 chrome moly, is a very chrome moly vanadium steel. It's called the chrome moly vanadium steel, and it is very high strength. So that's why if I had to use the suppose 2¼ chrome 1 moly steel, the thickness would have been around 250 or 300 millimeters, 250 millimeters, whereas this material is very high strength material. The normal operating pressure of this equipment was 181 kg per centimeter square, and hydrogen partial pressure. This number has a very significance. You know, hydrogen partial pressure was 117 because while choosing the material, there are, suppose for example, there are standards which are available. You might have heard the Nelson curve, okay, which actually tells you based on the pressure and the temperature what material to be chosen. So there are some guidelines available. Unfortunately, except that guidelines are only for the hydrogen partial pressure. It's the function of the hydrogen partial pressure, temperature, and the different materials. It doesn't tell you if the for example, nitrogen is present. What is the effect of the nitriding? That is not taken into account. So there are various things, but still some guidelines are available. That's how material was chosen for this particular service. Operating temperature, design pressure was 225. Operating temperature is, I think, around 370. Yes, operating temperature 370 degrees centigrade. So this is the equipment, as I told you, working with an inside catalyst and gas mixture of hydrogen, nitrogen, and ammonia. So what happened, I'll tell you, when this equipment was supplied, after something like 1.5 years, one thing I forgot to tell you, this equipment was manufactured not with a single cell of 169 thickness. This vessel was manufactured as a multi-wall. There were 3 layers of a material of 169 divided by 3 means approximately around 55 or 58 or 60 millimeters, you can say 55 to 60. So each 3 layers were made and equipment was manufactured. This is called as the multi-wall vessels by shrink fitting on each other. Okay, these are a unique thing which we used to manufacture in India. Only we are the people who supply the equipment. It has its own advantages in multi-wall because to get the properties and etc. If you high thickness properties, getting the impact test etc. is very difficult. Whereas if you get in the small thickness, but manufacturing is very tricky, you know, multi-wall, and we had mastered it. I can tell you all the equipment of this type working in India today are multi-wall supplied by the Larsen & Toubro. Okay. Now, what happened is after 1.5 years, in one of the things, because it is a multi-wall and there's a venting system, you know, to test whether gas is leaking from inside, they observed that some gas is leaking. So plant was stopped and gas was leaking. That's why plant was stopped. Then we went after they removed the catalyst inside, and we had actually seen the surface. So this is the photograph. I don't know whether you are able to see it properly. I'm sure. Are you able to see it? You are able to see.
Yes, sir. Yes,
yeah.
Sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So if you see that this is the weld. This is the weld seam, and there was this is a close photograph of that showing the crack on the weld seam. Can you see this crack? So there was a crack, and definitely this crack has gone throughout the section. then only the leakage will occur. If it had not have gone through this particular thing, the thing would not have leaked, right? So this crack was there. Like that, there are many cracks were there. Not on many, but something like a bottom portion of it. There are 2-3 places there are cracks on the sub seams as well as on weld seams. Okay. So what we did it in this case, because it was not possible to work this equipment, it was decided that anyway, let us cut the sample around that, because this repair in process, because the crack was throughout that particular thing, it was not possible. So we decided to take out the portion of it. So these are the samples taken. Inside, circumferential crack was around 120 millimeter long, and outside the same crack was looking like 85 millimeter long. This means the crack has started from inside, it has not gone fully, it went only for 85 millimeters. Okay. So these are the photographs of the crack sample which you had taken. And then what we did is, we did actually equipment itself, but also we did on a sample. So we did a hardness measurement of the full equipment. Look at the hardness. You will not believe this equipment is 3 meter diameter and around 29 meter long. Each and every portion of that equipment, means at a particular regular intervals, we did a hardness testing of the complete surface, inside surface. And there were a lot of internals were removed, everything was done, and the hardness was measured. Actually, if you look at the hardness numbers, high hardness observed on the welds, on welding specifically, high hardness was there, but not on all welds. Some welds had a hardness high, some welds were not. This one, up to 614 VHN, and on base material at some places was 438. Hardness at top division. Now, why it is mentioned under top division, I'll tell you. I'll go back to the slide. In this case, actually what happens is, gas is to come and enter inside the thing through some arrangement was there, internal arrangement. This thing was a particular thing, the gas which will be present there will be only at 370 degrees centigrade, and this gas is the inlet gas, which is a composition is a different, and also the temperature is a different, because as the gas flows down, the reaction will occur and the temperature of the gas will increase at this place. And because this particular catalyst is filled below this portion of it, that's the top descent of this particular thing, there is no catalyst inside. Okay. So that one had 195 to 251 VHN. Actually, this number is very close to the original hardness. So you can now this observation is very important. This means the top portion had this hardness, which is the basic hardness which was there originally. Other places hardness had gone up. So then all this is the hardness measurements were carried out. So and then we got the data on the hardness. Then macro examination. You look at this macro examination. Photograph reveals the crack with a wider opening at inner surface. Inner surface, the wider opening. Sorry. Yeah. And slowly as it goes out, the opening was reducing. This means crack initiated from the inner surface. Then micro examination of it. Photomicrograph of intergranular cracks observed in the weld metal sample removed from the, look at these cracks. They are intergranular cracks and they are branching. Lot of branching of that cracks, right? Micro examination again reveals similar, it is the vicinity of the crack, near crack and away from the crack area. Reveals similar and acceptable microstructure in the vicinity of the crack. In the vicinity of the crack, microstructure was okay, and away from the crack also microstructure was okay. But what happened in the other area we'll see. But micro, now look at this particular thing, where the cracks have occurred parallel to the inner surface. Photograph of intergranular cracks observed in the base metal. They are intergranular cracks. Okay, that was a very important thing to note. So if I summarize all this, whatever we have done in the microscopic examination, the microscopic examination of a transverse specimen in vicinity of the crack and away from the crack showed similar and acceptable microstructure. Microscopic examination did not show any weld defect, reheat and stress relief cracking. One can say, because I am a manufacturer, I am trying to say that manufacturing was nothing wrong. That's possible. But the Some observations, for example, analysis by SCM of fracture surface does not indicate any evidence of weld defect. Primary crack initiated from inner surface and many intergranular cracks observed. That's what it is. Then we did a macro examination, that is a scanning electron microscope. If you look at these photographs, reveals slant surface aspect with a flat facet at inner weld surface. This is what it means. Okay. Then rocky structure, photo microscope level reveals voids. Can you see these voids? There are voids which indicate that there is a hydrogen attack has occurred on the material. Then these photographs showing the intergranular hairline crack accompanied by fish eye annealing. This is called the fish eye annealing. Okay. Grains of grains in a secondary cracks near inner surface. So all these observations are very important. Then we did the EPMA, that is electron probe micro analyzer we use, and we can to know the composition of that particular substance. Okay, and then we found that distance from inner surface in millimeter. This is the distance from inner surface of the millimeter, and this is a weight percentage. So whether nitrogen has gone into the surface. So we distance reveals that nitrogen content was 0.9%, which was not originally in the material. So that's a very important observation. So if you look at this particular thing, overall summary of this particular this one was cracks are observed normal to the inner surface of the base material. Secondary cracks are observed along the primary crack wherever the crack from the encountered fine grains. SCM fracture surface showed crack initiation from inside surface. Then EDS and EPMA and metal chips analysis revealed that this is electron dispersion analysis revealed presence of nitrogen. The pickup of nitrogen and formation of possible nitride carbonates in this grade of chrome molybdenum material has led to the increase in hardness. Why increase hardness? Because of the grades, the carbonitrides are formed and which will be hardened material. So the hardness has increased. SCM of fracture surface showed rock candy structure typical of hydrogen attack, and transverse section of the specimen, both cell sample and the scallop, you don't worry about the internals, for example, the fish eye yarning of the grain boundaries, typical hydrogen attack. So that was the conclusion drawn from here. And based on all these particular things, we drawn the conclusion that the cracking which has occurred in this particular thing is because of the presence of nitriding and the hydrogen. Okay, so pickup of the nitrogen and as observed in analysis and subsequent increase in the hardness due to the nitriding resulted in a high increase in the hardness, causing embrittlement in the material and sensitive to hydrogen attack. Once the material became the sensitive to the embrittlement, it is as nitriding because of the nitriding, then hydrogen attack occurred more and hydrogen embrittlement occurred, and the cracking initiated on the inside surface. Considering the manufacturing records, now I want to study, though I have not shown you, all manufacturing records we collected, we actually analyzed that to see that hardness, what were the original hardness at various places, what were the composition, all that what I talked during the discussion of the methodology, we did that and we found that everything was normal at that time. And then we draw the conclusion that this has happened because of the thermochemical effect resulting from the specific process condition causing embrittlement due to nitridation. This means the process gas has come in contact, which was not supposed to come in contact because there are some internals which are there. Those internals actually got damaged, and because the internals got damaged, that catalyst came in contact with the surface of the equipment, which has caused the actually reaction to occur on the surface of the equipment, and thereby the nitriding occurred and hydrogen attack occurred and the failure has occurred. I want to tell you something interesting at the end of this. This resulted in the change of the internal configuration of the internal arrangement. Internal arrangement was not by us. It is generally this internal arrangement is carried out by process licensor, and process licensors after this failure had changed the internal arrangement of the equipment. That is actually a thing, proof of the thing, how the analysis can lead to the change in the design configuration. Okay, so having seen this case, let us go to the second case. Second case is very interesting. As I told you, it's the creep related case. There is a dissimilar joint. Actually, in this particular case, gases were flowing at a temperature of around 800 degrees centigrade from the reformer, and material was P91, and initial portion of the material was the stainless steel. What was coming out of the reformer, now the steam was flowing through this, sorry, the steam superheater line it was steam was coming out from the reformer, and the major pipe which was coming out initially was a stainless steel, and afterward the steam pipe was P91, that is a chrome alloy steel. Now this joint, the stainless steel was welded to the alloy steel, but with a particular joint. I'm going to show the configuration of the joint. So here what you see is nothing but we collected all the data on the piping to see that what type of support of the piping, what type of constraints are coming on the piping, whether it is giving the constraint because of that, because what problem was reported was every 9 months they used to get the crack on this weld and they were required to change the pipeline. Okay, so this joint, which I'm going to show you detail in the next one. Here, can you see this joint? This is the dissimilar. This is a P91. This is a stainless steel, and this is the joint. So this joint is the failure location. So this is a stainless steel pipe. This is a alloy steel pipe, and this is the failure location. So these weld details are shown, and this is the where the leak is to occur. And this one occurred more or less like 3 times at 90. At a particular location is to occur. And this occur and leak is to occur. So they used to stop the plant, replace the thing. Sometimes they used to repair. Some repairing used to be very difficult because the configuration was like this. If you look at this, this is the alloy steel portion of the weld. This is a stainless steel, and this is the weld. But there is because you cannot weld the stainless steel directly with the alloy steel, they used to weld the stainless steel with the first along with the stainless steel. Then they used to put the Inconel material on it. That's called the Inconel buttering. And then Inconel to P91, that is the alloy steel, used to be welded. This is how the configuration of the weld was there. And failure occurred at 3 times, which I told you just now. And tentative time of the failure after repair is to 6 to 12 months. Every time they used to repair, is to fail, like that, you know. So every 6 to 12 months, this to fail. So when this case came to us, we collected, fortunately for us, one of the sample, we could get the complete failed sample of that particular portion, because it was occurring many times. They repaired some 3-4 times, then they used to put it with a new pipe. So they said, okay, we'll give you the sample which is available, and they gave us the sample. Then we did a detailed analysis of it. First, we did a FEM analysis of it. We operating condition and shutdown condition, because operating condition 110 bar, temperature 530, no pressure loading, the temperature was 70 degrees. So we analyzed these particular cases, and then we found out the material stresses in the weld joint. P91, that is alloy steel, Inconel, and the SS. Inconel is the Inconel, that small buttering what I told you. So we found out the stress levels. The stresses were 102, 134, 3 times stress, allowable stress. This stress, yes, all is 306, this one. And the actual stress is 194, 205. This is the allowable stress. These are 3 times allowable stress, because the second is thermal stresses. So these are secondary stresses. And actual stress calculated is 194, 205, 138. So maximum stresses less than 3 SM. If you see in all the 3 cases, the maximum stresses is a 3. So configuration is the same with respect to immediate failure. So if you are somebody designing, will feel that yes, this particular thing is okay, because secondary stresses which are kept below 3 SM. But as maximum stresses are across the thickness, creep life evaluation is to be carried out. So we did a creep analysis, and also I want to say we did a lot of microstructural studies to find out whether the creep has occurred. The first thing is the creep life evaluation. Maximum stresses of SS region pipe is of the order of 138.8, which is well below the maximum allowable stress. So creep assessment is not required, and this region is safe. So we decided the creep stress for the stainless steel portion is not required. The maximum stresses in the Inconel weld region are 205, which are quite higher. Hence, creep rupture evaluation is carried out. Inconel C25 has a very good creep rupture. If you really look at this particular data here, we found the creep life is more than 10,000 hours at 593 degrees centigrade. The creep rupture life is this one, so it's a 138 months. So Inconel alone has no problem. Stainless steel alone has no problem. So what we did, we actually studied the alloy steel part of it. The maximum stresses in P91 region 194 MPa, which is quite higher. Hence, creep rupture evaluation is carried out. And there we found the creep rupture means the interface between the Inconel and the alloy steel. Creep rupture of like P91 region is 9.3 months. That's after evaluation we found creep life is only 9.3 months. The P91 region at P91 to Inconel interface is more prone to creep failure. And that's what is to happen. Because after 6 to sometimes 7 months, sometimes 10 months, that joint is to get the crack. So actually theory matched with what was happening. It's very interesting. So creep failure is to occur, and when we are really studied the microstructure, we found the creep type of properties, how at the end of that, the creep phenomena was occurring only at that particular location. Nowhere else that effect was occurring. So this was done. What was done? So we actually decided to change the configuration. And we changed the configuration by putting the big, means dissimilar joint. We have decided not to have that type of dissimilar joint with the constraints, saying that very close to the weld we will have the buttering and all that. Instead of that, we put the big piece of Inconel, big piece, stainless steel, big piece of Inconel and things like that, based on some analysis. And I want to tell you, after replacement, now something like 6 years, no failure has occurred. So this actually means this case study shows you how the analysis can help you to do that. So let us go to the third case study. This is the where actually this equipment is again in a fertilizer plant. This equipment was supplied, and all radiography, all NDTs were done, everything was done. After operation, after something like 1.5 years or 1.5 years, because generally all fertilizer plants, all critical equipment they carry out the NDT of the major work weld seams. They carry out the major NDT in order to see whether any cracks have developed. So on this equipment, they carried out the NDT and they found that at this location, sorry, that circle has moved there. At this location, if you see this, there's a crack on the weld seam, and that crack was observed. It was observed in the NDT ultrasonic testing, and then it became like now whether this crack will grow in operation. Then also people said whether this crack was originally existing. Anyway, our radiographic films were not showing the crack, but crack was existing after 1.5 years. So they said, oh, you might have missed it during this particular thing. But anyway, what was decided was to carry out the analysis. And actually, we carry out the linear elastic fracture mechanics calculations. But I'm not going to go through these calculations. I'll tell you why. Because Professor Naik is going to tell you about how to calculate the stress intensity and all those related fracture toughness, everything he is going to. You will have some lectures in a subsequent thing. So methodology I don't want to explain you, but I will tell you what happened as a result of this particular thing. Result was we found that the stress intensity was much less than the fracture toughness. If you see this Ki value is 23.3 and KIC is 61.42, it was less than that. So we said there's a equipment is safe with the existing crack. That was we decided. Further we calculated the crack growth rate and all that. So I'll show you. But this KIC was you calculated using the ASME section and division 3 because there are methodology given there. But we also did the FE analysis to find out the KI value, and you can see more or less same 23.5 KI value came in both the cases. So it looked okay. Then we further did the calculations of the critical crack length, and critical crack length was much higher than the actual thickness. So we said that the vessel will leak and will not burst. At the end of the day, we calculated the cycles which it will withstand, determine the remaining life of the equipment, and we found the actual cycles it can undergo is 66,000, whereas the actual operating cycles were only 1,000. So we said in this case there is no way. But however, I want to tell you something. We guaranteed the plant that don't worry, for this equipment will never fail. And I want to tell you, this is approximately now 14 years. Yeah, not 14, it's more than that. 16 years, equipment is working. Absolutely, crack has not grown. And they check every 2 years or 3 years, they check the crack length, and I understand that crack length has not grown even little. Okay, so that exists whatever the crack is. So just look at the powerful things of that. If the crack exists and somebody will say, oh, now what to do with replace the equipment? Not necessary. One can actually do the analysis and one can actually feel that equipment can be used. I'm going to go for the fourth case study, which is a very unique. This is actually a heat exchangers. If you look at this stage, there are two heat exchangers. They are in a series. This means the gas, for example, at a temperature of 204 degrees enters into the tubes here. It comes out because there are U2 exchangers, enters into the second exchanger and goes out. And cooling water was there on the cell side. It enters here, goes into this exchanger, then goes into this exchanger and goes out. What happened is this exchanger, after the operation of something like 10 months, started leaking. So it was supplied by us. That equipment was supplied by us, and I had an opportunity to visit the site, because though we had supplied, we had not done any design of this equipment. Neither the selection of the material, nothing was done by us. It was only manufactured by us. And actually very interesting, this equipment, what you see here, first one, heat exchanger was manufactured by us. Second one was manufactured by other manufacturer. Okay. And failure was only in this equipment. So I went there and had a look at it. And material of the tubes were stainless steel SS304. When I went there, I was told it is leaking. So I went to the site and had a look at the site. Next, sir, I will take 5 minutes more. Okay.
No problem, sir.
So we had a look at the site, and people said, look here, the gas is coming here, going into the both exchanger. This exchanger, nothing has happened. This exchanger only has a problem. So after that, I alone stayed there and started studying. And I found that failure has occurred only in a particular zone of the tubes. Initial period of the tubes where the gas enters, those first something like 200 millimeters, there was a problem. Cracks were there only in first 100 millimeters. After that, and the dark surface was there for the first around 200 millimeters. Afterwards, tubes were shining, stainless steel tubes were shining. Nothing was there. So I said, very good. This means, let me see. Then actually, some person was working there. So he saw me looking at this exchanger. He came and he was actually a worker who was doing the maintenance work of some other equipment. He said, sir, this particular equipment had a problem. Water is to come here like a jali. Water is to come out of the tubes. So I said, where it's to come? So he told me that, showed me the area. Then I removed the scales which were formed on the tubes, and then I could find the cracks on the tubes. So immediately that time I want to tell you something. I was not knowing, because I was very young at that time, but I said it's a stress corrosion cracking. Because little bit I was knowing about stress corrosion cracking. So I said it's a stress corrosion cracking. This problem got solved in the sense, as far as the customer concerned, they had supplied tubes to us. They had supplied the design to us. So I came out. But afterwards, I started studying why this failure has occurred only in that much zone. I collected all operating data, and then we actually, these two exchangers, if you see, I plotted the metal wall temperature and this is the gas temperature and metal wall temperature. The first equipment, if you look at this is the metal wall temperature graph. Is 100 degrees here, then slowly it comes down, and gas temperature 204 at inlet, it comes down. Then I did a literature search, and I found Japanese people have published for stainless steel tubes, specifically for the heat exchangers of different types, what should be the chloride levels in the water. They are given the threshold levels, and I plotted those threshold levels. Can you see this particular threshold level here? The allowable metal wall temperature and allowable process temperature and chloride level of 20. Actually, they said for up to this temperature based on the chloride levels, because chloride levels were 25 to 55 millimeters we found, because I collected data on the water chemistry, and there were chlorides were as high as 55. Then I plotted these graphs, and I found that this means the problem is supposed to occur only in this region. That is the first region of this particular thing, because afterwards the allowable, the stress corrosion cracking was not occurring, because metal stresses temperatures were comparatively low and the phenomena was not occurring. Now imagine somebody found this type of threshold levels at that time based on some studies. I'm sure they used the fracture mechanics techniques in order to do these threshold levels studies along with the corrosion and the mixture of the stresses. So this is the case study which explains you the damage tolerance, how to establish using that threshold levels. That's what I studied. Actually, I'm not giving you that example, but something similar equipment I had a recent opportunity last 2 years back to do the analysis, and exactly there, but that failure was of a different type. Same again chlorides, but in a very high temperature conditions. And actually, I found there are people established the threshold levels, and threshold levels concept works actually. Okay. So having seen these 4 case studies, let us have a concluding remarks to close the lecture. What we have seen the bathtub curve initially. If you really look at this bathtub curve, the first 2 depends upon design and manufacturing. That is the infant mortality and useful life is controlled by the design and manufacturing. The remaining 2 by the operation and maintenance. And what is our purpose actually? To improve the useful life as much, improve life and not to have the infant mortality. Definitely we will take the case of 4 factors we will take into account, and useful life to increase. The main goal of the equipment is to increase the useful life of the equipment. That's what we want to do. So successful integration, if you, these 4 factors, which are basic factors, if they treat independently, definitely failure will occur. But if you carry out the successful integration of these 4 factors, along with, which is very important, where if the problem comes, do the failure analysis and use the damage tolerance methods during the life cycle of the equipment and systems, we can increase the reliability. So damage tolerance has a, suppose you find some small cracks in the equipment, do the analysis, find out whether these cracks will grow, how many years can be sustained, what will the crack growth, what will be cycles it can sustain. All that analysis can be done and you can improve the reliability. So, but you must do the failure analysis so that you know the cause, so that proper damage tolerance analysis can be carried out. So just to tell you, damage tolerance has an importance in operating cycle of the equipment and systems. Use it with a judgment and it will give you a lot of good results for it. Doing analysis is the one part, doing the various detailed study of the failure analysis is very important. Okay, so this concludes my presentation. But just to give you a small end note at the end, failure is a centered. This is actually I am quoting Professor Henry Petroski, and I like this quote very much, and I think it is apt for our presentation. It says, failure is a central to engineering. Every single calculation that an engineer makes is a failure calculations. I want to tell you this sentence when I read first, I said, what wrong it looks to be. Every single calculation that an engineer makes is a failure calculation. But when I read the next sentence, successful engineering is all about understanding how things breaks or fail. Then I said it's a complete, because if I know what type of failure likely phenomena occurs, then when I do the design calculations, I know whether I consider all those factors. So every design calculation is actually a failure calculation, because if failure is in my mind, then I will take the note of it and I'll do the calculations according to that, so that failure will not occur. So it's a great quote. With this, thank you very much for your patience listening. I know it's a monotonous because I have to continuously talk for 1.5 hours now. So next sir, it's open to you now. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Are you able to hear me or no?
Yes. 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 We can hear.
Okay. Okay.
So, participants, if you are having any doubt, you can ask.
No questions. Okay. Can I close? Okay, Ganesh, what I'll do, I'll take 2 minutes more to tell about Professor Henry
Yes.
Petroski. Okay?
Yes. 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 Right.
Yeah. So Henry Petroski actually is born in 1942. He's an American engineer specialized in failure analysis. Why I'm telling this history, I'll tell you at the end of it. Okay? Failure analysis, a professor of civil engineering and history and history. Imagine civil engineering and history at Duke University. Before beginning his work at Duke in 1980, Petrovsky worked at the University of Texas at Austin from 1968 to 74 and Argonne National Laboratory from 75 to 80 as a group leader, where he was responsible for research and development efforts in fracture mechanics. So he's an expert not only failure analysis, he's an expert in the fracture mechanics. Okay. Petrovsky is the Alexander S. Vice Professor, which is Professor of Civil Engineering and Professor of History at Duke University. In 2004, Petrovsky was appointed to the United States Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board and was reappointed in 2008. So he was on the board of Nuclear Waste of the United States. So he's a very renowned person. Petrovsky has received honorary degrees from, I mentioned some universities, but he has received 23 honorary doctorates. Petrovsky was honored with the 2014 John P. Magron Award of Science. He is registered professional engineer in Texas and distinguished member of various societies, American Society of Civil Engineers, American Society of Academic Arts and Science, because he is a history professor also. And he is a philosophical society and National Academy of Engineers. And this is very important. Professor Petrovsky is also a prolific author. Petrovsky has written over a dozen of books. You might have seen the photograph where he is sitting along with his books. The first book of his was published in 1985. The name of the book is To Engineer is a Human, the Role of Failure in Successful Design. I think many of you like to read this book. It's a nice book. And there are many books he has written. There are around 4 out of 12 or 13 books, 4 or 5 are technical books. And many books he has written which are nothing but including a number of titles detailing the industrial design, history of common everyday objects like pencil. One of the books name is the pencils. Another is the paper clips, toothpicks. And I read the review of the pencils, book Pencil, very, very interesting. It gives you different philosophy of the design. So we can have a look at it. An important thing just to note is his first book was converted into the film. The film name was When Engineering Fails. Okay. And he is a frequent lecturer at various places, American Scientist and PISM, etc. So this is just to give you about Professor. Now you can start asking questions. Now I think I can stop sharing, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No problem.
I can stop sharing. So, yeah.
Participants, the session is open for question and answers. So please raise your questions if you have any.
Sir, in your absence, I took 2 minutes to give the biography of the Professor Petrovsky.
I missed that, sir. I had lost my internet connectivity. Sorry about that.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you, sir.
Thank you.
Any questions? No? I think I was too fast, too slow. What was that?
No, I think the speed was okay. Maybe it was so well explained that they don't have much questions. I have some questions, sir.
Yeah, okay.
You have said in the conclusions of the first case study, you
Yeah.
said that the process licensors have changed the internal arrangements.
Yes.
But then I was actually expecting that perhaps there will occur some change in the material selection process, but that did not unexpectedly happen.
No, material selection, some places some people prefer the different material, but actually major thing was, if you can see, advantage of using that material was, but other materials are also susceptible, but they are less susceptible as compared to this material. But if the internals are not changed, the phenomena of the leakage will continue of the catalyst, and it is a detrimental to any material which will be using it. Okay. So
Okay.
people have changed the configuration of the internals so that no time the catalyst will come in contact with the surface of the material. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But there are some people also, as you rightly said, people use the, like, for example, instead of this Inconel lining inside, which is actually nitriding may not occur on an Inconel. So people use the Inconel, but it becomes very expensive as well as very difficult to manufacture as a layer inside of the Inconel. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So
Sir,
see, equipment, your point is very valid. So what happens is a combination, always is a combination of various things. And catalyst leaking is not a good sign, because then sometimes reactions can become uncontrolled.
Okay. Okay. So there is chemical aspect of the problem also.
Yeah. It's a that's what I'm saying. The failure analysis, when people do it, you learn a lot of things. Because for example, in this particular case, because it's our equipment, I was required to discuss with so many experts. You will not believe, I spent something like 3.5 months to do the failure analysis.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You have also mentioned
not continuously, but because people will do the testing, but period taken for around 3 months for the analysis.
one more question, incidentally, which has come, that typically how much time a failure analysis may take? We are all interested in knowing that.
How much
time a typical failure analysis may take?
Yeah, see, it depends upon the type of the problem. Like I said, this case, it was 3 months, because we used to visit to the site, we'll call some people, do the testing, different things. What I told you, 3 months is including from the beginning time.
Okay.
Real work, suppose if you are working continuously, it may not take more than 20 days, right? But you will visit to the site, you will talk to some people, you will collect the data, all that type of thing. Collecting the data itself, for example, first collecting all the records took around 10 days, 15 days,
Yeah.
So, but if you collect everything, the failure analysis, like second problem, the creep problem, we took something like total, in that case, 1 month. Because so many testing were supposed to be done there, and the analysis was supposed to be done there, and they had given all the data in the beginning itself. There the customer gave all the data at one stroke. Okay, so we took around 1 month. So it depends upon type of the failure. It can range from anywhere between 1 week, 10 days to 1 month, 6 weeks, or whatever it is. Depends upon type of the problem, sir. Because the failure analysis depends upon data availability, sample availability, what type of testing you are going to do, what type of testing, whether it's in-house. Like for example, for many of us, advantage was many of the testing were in-house. Okay.
Okay.
Suppose if you are going to do your testing is not in-house, you are depending upon somebody. Then imagine what will happen.
The time will increase. Yes.
Like EPMA, that electron probe micro analyzer, that we were not having. We have taken it from the IIT. Okay.
Okay.
So it depends upon whether all the instruments are available with you, and whether what NDTs you do, whether who is going to do the NDTs. So it's very difficult to tell the time.
Okay. You have also, sir, you have also mentioned that L&T has actually fabricated this particular reactor, ammonia reactor, in 3 layers. If you see the length of the equipment, it is 20 meters, huge length, and its diameter is also huge. I mean, as a mechanical engineer, I am just wondering how multi-layering could be done for a 20-meter long tube. I mean, can you just tell certain things if possible in this regard?
Yeah, no problem. It's a multi-wall vessel. So what we'll do, sir, is there will be sail courses. Like for example, 20 meters means say there are something like 3 meters each. So some 7 sail courses. Okay.
Okay.
So there will be one sail course will be only 7 meters.
Okay.
And then what we do, it will not be even 7 meters. In this case, actually, 3 meters.
3 meters. 3 meters. Okay.
There are 7 sail courses, upper 3 meters. Now 3 meters. What we do, we manufacture the inner cell.
Okay.
Then we'll manufacture the outer cell.
Yeah.
And then it will be shrink fitted. The outer cell will be manufactured in such a way that there will be the perimeter of that will be little smaller than the perimeter of the OD of the inner cell.
Okay.
Then outer cell will be heated and it will be put on that, and it will be shrink fitted on the inner cell.
Okay.
Like that, you will build the 2 layers or 3 layers or 4 layers, depending upon. We have even made 4 layers. Okay.
All the layers are actually shrink fitted.
Shrink fitted, and just to tell you, sir, whether the shrink fitting is perfect or because whether any gap remains, because after shrink fitting, that each cell core is supposed to behave like a unique cell. This means original thickness equal to that, it should work. No, otherwise it will be a problem.
Yes.
So what we are done in the initial period of when we started this manufacturing 2 years back, means around I think 80s. That time we manufactured the equipment and actually we pressure tested the equipment to see whether failure will occur. And that time strain gauging was done, the equipment to see whether distortion will occur. And most important is, during the hydro test, whether they will behave as a one cell or whether they will behave as individual cells.
Yeah.
See, if you put an inside pressure, it will expand. But when you depressurize it, it should not happen that other cells, outer cell will remain outer and inner cell will only get come to original. Right?
Okay.
So we had done that type of testing in the beginning, and then we are actually our manufacturing method was excellent. I can tell you, we never got a single problem. Sir, one few seconds, just hold on.
Sure.
Sorry, sir.
Sir, no problem. What was my other question is, if you have such 7 cells, then the welding is performed for the entire 169 millimeter depth in one pass. I mean, from one side.
No. Then like any other, suppose even if you would had so many single cell also, single cell to single cell also, you would have welded it. No, you will not get the single cell also will not be up 20 meters. It will be up 3 meter each.
Okay. So welding for such a high thickness also is not a problem, and that can be managed.
No, that can be done. See, nowadays people are welding. For example, in our place, some equipment are around 320 millimeter thick welding they do.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah. But then there are different methods to weld that, different weld configurations. This is a science in itself, right?
Okay. Yes. Any other questions, participants?
No, not a single question.
So one more question in chat box.
What
effects come under cryogenic below zero temperature?
What is that?
Occurs. What effect come under cryogenic, which is below 0 degree temperature?
What crack?
Sir, he wants to perhaps say that what is the effect that is happening on the material if the operating temperature is much below 0 degrees Celsius?
Yeah. See, then under cryogenic, you have to select the materials which are suitable for those temperatures, because brittle fractures, etc. That selection of the materials has to be done to suit those temperatures, right?
Yes.
And if the cracks occurs, whoever has asked, finally the phenomena will be similar, but depends upon the temperature and the materials, because you will select for cryogenic temperature, material selection itself is another science, right?
Yes.
So then you have to understand what type of material properties are there, if it are coming under impact, and so many temperature below temperature minus cryogenic temperature will be very low, minus 96 below, minus 100 below. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Sir, I think there are no other questions. So
okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I just want to, dear participants, we have heard a very illustrative lecture from Sharekar Saab today. He has explained us what is failure analysis, and now you must have made out that failure analysis essentially talks about what has happened with the failed component or part of a system, and it tells us about what has happened in the form of history of the life of that component, and there are traces of the history which are present, which should be collected by a good stress analyzer in the form of evidences, as he was rightly stressing. And he also told us that this information which one gets from the failure analysis can improve the way in which one can actually design or solve the same problem next time that can be actually dictated by the failure analysis in the form of investigations that are carried out with the help of root cause analysis. And therefore, I feel that failure analysis can actually never be separated from fracture mechanics, because if the failure is at all going to occur because of the crack growth persistently occurring at different operating conditions, then it will definitely give some information to the designer as to how this problem can be sorted out with the help of fracture mechanics, so that it does not recur again. So it was very important connection between damage tolerance or fracture mechanics and failure analysis, which Shadekar ji has explained it to us with the help of some basic discussion, as well as 4 very significant case studies. I am thankful to him on behalf of my whole institute, department, and on myself. And on the behalf of AICTE, I thank you, Shadekar sir, for this interesting lecture and for having taken out your precious time for delivering this lecture to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's my pleasure. Actually, I'm very happy to deliver this lecture, because this is the only way we can actually pass on our experience to the people. And I'm thankful to you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank you all participants. It was a little lengthy lecture, but I think that's a part of the thing.
Sir, you are about to finish 2 hours in 2 minutes. Therefore, we have exactly done it in time. That's not a problem. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. For
Thank you, sir.
delivering the lecture.
Thank you. Thank you to all. Bye.
Yes.